boy was born into wind and open sky. The tall grass swayed for miles around his people's camp, rolling hills, scattered pines, and skies so wide they made the land feel like it breathed. Bison moved in dark, heavy herds across the horizon, their hooves like distant thunder. Birds wheeled high above the ridges, and the rivers ran cold and clear over smooth stones. This was the northern plains, still untamed, still sovereign. This was Lakota country. Crazy Horse came into the world around 1840, near the Black Hills, sacred ground to his people. He was born into the Oglala band of the Lakota Sioux, to a medicine man father and a mother of the Miniconjou. His hair was lighter than most, almost sandy brown, a rare trait that made him stand out. Some said he was touched by the spirits, even then. His early days were filled with motion. His people lived with the land, not on it. They followed the great bison herds, their lives woven into the patterns of the animals they depended on. When the herds moved, the village moved. Tipis were packed in minutes, loaded onto travois, and the procession would begin. Riders guiding horses, children clinging to mothers, and dogs trailing behind. The rhythm of life was migration, not conquest. And through these seasons of movement the boy learned, by watching, not by asking. He studied the older hunters as they read the signs left in mud and grass, as they cut meat with stone-sharp precision, as they offered quiet prayers before taking a life. He listened to the stories told by firelight, where old warriors spoke not just of battles, but of balance, how to live rightly in a world where everything had a spirit. He was drawn to the elders, not just to what they said, but how they said it, slowly, thoughtfully, with pauses that meant more than words. These old men spoke of the stars, of the hills, of the times before fences. They taught that every trail was connected to a story, and every story connected to the land. He carried these lessons without fanfare, tucked inside himself like an ember. He wasn't loud, he didn't boast. When other boys practiced their battle cries, he sat in the shade and watched. He preferred to be near the animals, to move with them, to learn how they fit into the world without disturbing it. And then, one day, he left. He went alone, as tradition demanded, into the hills for his vision quest. No food, no water, just the wind, the sky, and whatever would reveal itself. When he returned, he was changed. He said little, but something had settled in him, a quiet knowledge, a set of rules he would live by for the rest of his days. He would never dress to impress, never take trophies, never claim greatness. His strength would come from humility, and if he stayed true to what he had seen, he would be protected until the day his spirit was meant to leave. No drums marked his return, no speeches were made, but among those who watched closely, something was different. The boy had stepped into something larger than himself. He was no longer just a child of the plains, he was Crazy Horse. The land began to feel different, not suddenly, but like a slow tightening, like a great hand closing around something wild, trying to shape it into something it was never meant to be. The bison, the heartbeat of the plains, were fewer now. Their herds, once thick as clouds on the move, were breaking apart, left to rot on the prairie, shot from trains by men who didn't need the meat, bones bleaching in the sun. The land was being emptied, not by famine or war, but by design. Wagons rolled in behind them, endless lines of them pulled by oxen, heavy with tools and wire. Surveyors drove stakes into the soil, thin wooden sticks tied with red ribbon, slicing the land into squares as if it could be owned. Treaties were signed in distant rooms, then broken in closer ones. Maps redrawn. The Great Plains, once a sea of movement, was being divided like a farm field. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, were declared off-limits to settlers by treaty in 1868, but that promise shattered like glass when gold was found in those hills. Suddenly, the word treaty lost its meaning. Miners flooded in, carving roads, cutting timber, ripping open the earth in search of shine. And when the Lakota resisted, the army came to make room for progress. Crazy Horse watched as the promises crumbled. One by one, the bands were pressured onto reservations. Parcels of land meant to contain them, control them. The agency men came next, bringing ledgers, rations, rules. Men with pens and paper trying to replace centuries of memory with numbers and signatures. It was more than loss. It was insult. It was the land being measured like it was dead. It was the sound of hammers building outposts where prayer circles once stood. It was hunger, contained by fences, reduced to waiting for flour from white hands. And with every new trail, every new telegraph wire, the pressure built. Not all Lakota leaders agreed on how to respond. Some chose the path of survival, signing agreements, moving onto the reservations, trying to protect what little they could. But others, those who still felt the fire in their lungs and the earth in their bones, refused to fold. Crazy Horse was one of them. He would not be confined, not by borders drawn in ink, nor by soldiers in blue coats. He took his band and stayed in the open country, away from the forts, outside the rules. He still hunted, still moved, still believed that freedom wasn't something to negotiate. It was something to live. Anger grew, but it wasn't hot and reckless. It was steady, controlled, like the silence before a storm. It passed from camp to camp, through whispered stories, through warriors returning home, blooded from skirmishes, through the sound of another tree falling where a trading post would rise. It was in the eyes of mothers counting fewer hides, in the stories the elders told with tighter voices, in the restless way the young men sat at the edge of councils wanting to fight. And through it all, Crazy Horse said little. But when he moved, others followed, because they could all feel it. Something was coming. Not just another skirmish, not just another treaty broken, something larger. The land was groaning under the weight of it, and soon blood would answer blood. By the summer of 1876, the powder keg had split wide open. The US government had ordered all Lakota bands to report to reservations or be considered hostile. But Crazy Horse and others had no intention of surrendering land that had never been given away. He and his followers, joined by Sitting Bull's people, the Northern Cheyenne, and others, gathered in a great village tucked along the winding banks of the Little Bighorn River. It was the largest native encampment in living memory. Teepees stretched out across the grass in rows and circles, smoke curling into the air, the sound of children laughing, horses nickering, old women singing as they stirred pots. It was not a war camp, it was a home. A brief breath of peace in a world closing in. But the army was coming. George Armstrong Custer, arrogant and ambitious, was riding west with the 7th Cavalry, around 600 men. He believed he was chasing down a scattered band. He thought they would run. He thought he could strike quickly, crush the resistance, and return east a hero. He was wrong. On the morning of June 25th, Custer split his forces, trying to surround the village. He moved fast, eager for glory. But when his men crested the ridges above the Little Bighorn, they did not find a few dozen warriors. They found thousands. Sitting Bull had performed a sun dance in the days before, cutting deep into his flesh in prayer. In his trance, he saw soldiers falling into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers, their bodies tumbling into defeat. He told his people they would win this battle. They only had to stand together, and they did. Crazy Horse led the charge. He rode into the fight bare-chested, paint streaked across his face, his long hair flying behind him. Witnesses said he didn't seem to ride. He floated, weaving through bullets as if protected by the spirits. He didn't shout orders. He pointed, he rode, and the warriors followed. The battle didn't last long. Custer's troops were overwhelmed, cut off, panicked, scattered. The warriors hit hard from all sides, riding fast, firing from beneath the manes of their horses. No mercy, no retreat. The soldiers tried to form a circle, tried to hold the line, but it was no use. The land itself betrayed them, open, exposed, unforgiving. And then it was over. Custer's body was found on a rise that would come to be known as Last Stand Hill. He lay among his brothers and his men, stripped, pierced, lifeless. Some say Crazy Horse was there in the final moments. Some say he never laid a hand on Custer. But the victory was clear and total. Over 260 US soldiers lay dead. It was the worst defeat the army had suffered at the hands of native forces, and it sent shockwaves through Washington and the East. For the Lakota, it was a fierce and shining moment, a stand for freedom, for land, for a way of life. But even in triumph, they knew what would follow: revenge, relentless and brutal. Still, on that hot June day by the waters of the Little Bighorn, the earth belonged to them. The drums fell silent, smoke drifted through the sage, and Crazy Horse, who had never signed a treaty, never sought fame, stood unbent, just a man living the truth of his vision. After the Little Bighorn, the sky turned dark. The US government, humiliated, responded not with negotiation, but with vengeance. More troops, more pressure, more destruction. They cut the Lakota's support at the roots, slaughtering the bison in droves, torching supplies, harassing friendly tribes who gave refuge to those still resisting. Winter crept in like a second army, and slowly, inevitably, the free camps dwindled. Crazy Horse stayed out the longest. For nearly a year after the battle, he led his people through snow-choked canyons and across frozen plains, moving like smoke, never staying long. But it was no longer war, it was survival. Ammunition ran low, food scarcer still, children began to die in the cold. His followers, once in the thousands, were now a starving handful. Their horses were thin, their faces were hollow. In the spring of 1877, with no more options and the weight of his people suffering on his shoulders, Crazy Horse rode in. He came not with a white flag, but with dignity. On May the 6th, he surrendered at Fort Robinson in Nebraska. Not in chains, not captured, he walked in. Even then, he refused to be tamed. He did not pose for photographs. He refused translation tricks. He spoke directly. He would not be put on display. When a general offered him a seat in a circle of chairs, he sat in the dirt instead. The earth was still his. At first they left him alone. They called him a good Indian now. He was given a tent near the agency and allowed to visit his sick wife. But unease grew in the ranks. Crazy Horse was still a symbol, still a flame that might catch wind. That summer, rumours spread. The army claimed he was plotting an uprising, that he planned to flee the agency, to stir rebellion among other bands. It was unclear who started the lies. Perhaps jealous scouts, perhaps army officers uncomfortable with a man they couldn't fully control. Either way, the order came down. He was to be arrested. On September the 5th, 1877, they told him to come peacefully, to discuss things at the guardhouse. He came, cautious, suspicious. Something was wrong. His father sensed it too. At the gates of Fort Robinson they tried to grab him, without warning, without honour. Crazy Horse resisted, twisting free. He pulled a knife, not to attack, but to defend himself. He didn't get far. A soldier drove a bayonet into his side. He collapsed to the dirt, stunned, bleeding, still breathing. They carried him to the post surgeon's office and laid him on the floor. He refused the army cot. He asked for his father. And there, on the cold boards, under the low ceiling of a white man's fort, he died. No great speech, no final curse, just breath slipping away. He was 37. No one knows where his body lies. His parents took it quietly, under cover of darkness, and buried it somewhere in the hills. The place has never been revealed, because Crazy Horse does not belong to museums. He belongs to the land, to the wind in the pines, to the smoke over the ridges, to the memory of a people who once rode unbroken beneath the open sky. He was not a chief. He held no office. He gave no interviews. And yet, among all those who resisted, his name endures, not for what he claimed, but for what he gave up. Not for the battles he won, but for the freedom he refused to surrender. Crazy Horse didn't die to make a point. He lived to keep a promise.